Welcome to Reflections on Music and Nature. I'm very excited to open season 2 with a floating opera called Newtown Odyssey, which is premiering on a polluted creek in Brooklyn, September 8th through 10th, 2023. This is a collaboration between artist Marie Lorenz, writer David Spiotta, and composer and musician Kurt Rohde, who met over 10 years ago at the American Academy in Rome. The project has been in development for several years and is supported by Creative Capital and the NEA. It's a very interesting and unusual project. On their website, the artists write, set on a busy canal in a densely populated city, Newtown Odyssey presents a non-traditional opera heard amid the sounds of surrounding traffic and industry. Performers sing aboard floating stages and pass by in boats, while the audience observes from the shore. The set of the opera might initially seem like a typical day along the urban waterfront. A boat club outing, a tugboat passing, a group of volunteers cleaning up the shore. As the audience moves deeper into the creek, however, strange realities begin to unfold. It seems that some changes are visible to the audience, but not their guides. So Kurt actually happened to be my dissertation advisor at UC Davis, and he continues to be a really important friend and mentor for me in my artistic life. When I heard about this project he was working on, I thought it would be perfect for this series, and I was really eager to interview him about it. What I love most about this work is the way it allows the environment into it, and the way it breaks down this false dichotomy between nature and humans that we often create. You can buy tickets to go see the performance at newtownodyssey.com, where you can also view recordings, visual imagery, and other content. I hope you enjoy this interview, and thanks so much to Marie, Kurt, and Dana for sharing their time and their thoughts with me. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's great to see all of you. If each of you could first kind of just introduce yourself so we can hear your voice, tell us your name and just a little bit about your background and the role that you're taking in Newtown Creek. Maybe I'll start with, Newtown Odyssey, I should say. Maybe I'll start with Kurt.
Kurt Rohde. I'm a musician, and I live in San Francisco, and I compose and play viola and teach music. And Marie, Dana, and I met at the American Academy in Rome in 2008-9, and this is a big collaborative. I don't know, sort of a big collaborative node where everything is coming together years later. Yeah, and so I'm writing the music and doing the sound for the opera.
And playing also. Aren't you also playing viola?
I probably will be playing viola.
Okay.
We'll see.
Awesome. Great. And maybe Marie, if you could introduce yourself a bit.
Yeah, I'm Marie Lorenz. I'm a visual artist, and I'm making the sets, costumes, and sort of designing the way that the audience will kind of arrive at the piece. My artwork has a lot to do with urban waterways, and right now I'm sitting on the bank of the Newtown Creek, which is an incredibly polluted industrial waterway in Brooklyn that many people, or it's on the border of Brooklyn and Queens, and it's so sort of, there's so many like trucking companies and cement factories and garbage dumps all around me. The gas companies right behind me, that many people don't even know that this really pretty little land and waterway exist right in the middle of Brooklyn. And so part of the reason that I thought it would be interesting to collaborate with Dana and Kurt, and I think it was sort of Kurt's idea to bring the music to this place. And so I would say that as a contributor to the opera, I'm sort of the connection to this site.
Great. Dana, could you introduce yourself a little bit as well?
Yeah, I'm Dana Spiotta, and I'm a novelist and a professor at Syracuse University. And yeah, and I've been, my contribution is the libretto, and it's really exciting because Kurt and Marie had the idea to do this, and they invited me to do the libretto, and I collaborated a little with both of them. There was another opera attempt that Kurt and I made that didn't, that we did a little bit of work on about Walt Disney. And then Marie and I did a trip on the Erie Canal together when I was doing an article for the New York Times Magazine. I almost died, but it was so much fun. And so I knew they would have really exciting creative ideas and let me be as weird as, and I'm inexperienced in music. So with Kurt and Marie's guidance, I came up with this little narrative element that we have and the words.
That's really exciting. So the river is close to you, and water is close to you. Actually, that kind of brings me to my next question. I was wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about your own relationship with the natural world. So whatever that, I mean, obviously nature is a big topic, many different meanings. So what is your own personal relationship to the natural world, and what does nature mean to you? Maybe Dana, if you can kind of start.
Well, I think one of the things I was really excited about with this collaboration was the connection between the natural world and the urban world is really interesting. And Marie's work, where you're kind of like these invisible, these things that are in plain sight, that are right within a city like New York that you kind of ignore, and yet have kind of been the depository for a lot of human abuse for the Newtown Creek for centuries now. It was a super fun site. It is a super fun site. It's just, it's been just dumped on forever. And yet it's very moving how it just sort of has this incredible resilience. And also the people who are trying to repair it and restore it, that's very moving. So for me, it's kind of that intersection between the human and the natural. I mean, because we are the natural, we are the virus, we are the natural world too. And sometimes we forget that. And so I like this idea of kind of focusing on the things that are familiar, and yet we don't really engage in the natural world that exist in these industrial landscapes, urban landscapes. That's very exciting to me. Any places where there's a tension like that is really interesting to me.
Sure, and you can really experience that tension as an audience, I think, probably for this piece. Marie, same question. So your relationship to nature, and what does that mean to you? Like this idea of nature, what does it mean?
Yeah, I think everything that Dana said is so resonates with me so strongly. There's this great Slavoj Žižek video that always like rings in my mind when I think about this question. And it was like some little spot that was produced for like Vice Video or something. But he's like talking about he's in like a garbage dump, or like there's all these piles of garbage. There's these like trucks going around, and he was talking about sort of the new nature and saying how we've sort of created this, and he's like, he looks around him and there's just like piles of trash everywhere. And he's like, this is natural. This is your nature. This is, the natural world. And it's just like the most abject, like terrible place. And so I like that idea that, more than half the world lives in cities. So more than half of humans live in cities. So for more than half of the human population of the world, like the city is our nature, is our natural world, like everything. And like there's places like this, like there's this, I don't know if you guys can hear this like on Zoom, but there's this beautiful little bird singing in a tree, like maybe 8 feet from me. But then 20 feet from me is the city sanitation, like lot where they park the garbage trucks. So it's like, there's this sliver of green and then just complete garbage. and then the river is sort of looks beautiful. It's really clear today. It's a pretty day on the river, but but there's a 2-foot thick layer of sediment on the bottom of the river that has mercury and all sorts of terrible pollutants from like decades of pollution. And so I like that. I like the idea that we're like learning how to find recreation and learning how to find connection in these areas that are neglected and overlooked, because this is like what we did. And so we should be finding ways to sort of get with this nature.
I can see this also in the visuals that in the, these barges that you've created and, some of the kind of videos that are, shared on YouTube where you have these, it looks like garbage, these barges, but it's really beautiful at the same time. So I love this idea of like the merging of, what's we traditionally think of as nature. And, it's like you said, where everything is all merged together, and we're living in it. We're not separate from it. And the sound, this idea of sound, is super relevant. And I imagine that's, regardless of sort of what your professional background is, like all these different areas, storytelling, narrative, the visual space, and then the soundscape, you're all thinking about those all at the same time. So Kurt, I'd love to hear your what is your own personal relationship to nature, and what does that mean to you?
I think that growing up mostly in the Hudson Valley, where it's so beautiful all the time, and I didn't really even recognize it as anything other than being beautiful, other than what it was. I didn't really associate beauty to it until I left, and I left quite young. So that going back is always sort of this very startling experience to me. First of all, it's where I'm from, and it has a certain type of, I have a sort of anchoring there and comfort. But every time I go back, I'm just really struck by how beautiful the natural beauty of the Hudson Valley is, and how comforting it is. And over the years, a lot of the area that I've grown up has changed, and even a lot of that change is mostly developments, mostly just increase in population and its impact on the small towns and the small cities that are along the river that I grew up in. And it's really interesting how I sort of see past the development to this. I don't even realize how idealized I've made this space that I sort of grew up in, this natural space. I sort of see past all the stuff that's been added on top of it. And I think that that's actually had a really interesting effect on how I see or just experience being out in nature. So every year I go out to the desert, the high deserts in the southwest, and I spend a fair amount of time alone there, where it's really beautiful, it's really isolated, but it's also sort of hazardous, because if something were to happen, we've all seen 128 Hours. If something were to happen and I fell down a crevasse, that would just be it. It's just like, but it would be a beautiful demise. It'd be sort of the best way to go. So I really feel like being drawn towards places that are sort of, they have this isolated natural beauty that I think was formed when I was living in the Hudson Valley. And this morning, just going back a little bit to what Dana and Marie were saying about how the actual Newtown Creek, all these strange intersections of industry and humanity inside of the non-human natural world in that space. I had to go and be at the creek and wait there for a couple hours at about 7 this morning while Marie was going off to do some work. And so I was watching the big stuff, all the lumber that had been delivered, and just sitting there. And I was laying down on the picnic table, the new picnic table that Marie is sitting at right now. I was just sort of sitting there, and I was thinking, God, this is just sort of like being in the Hudson Valley. It's just like being along the Hudson River. And 5 feet from me, if I were to walk into that water, I would get heavily damaged by walking into that water. it's just not good water to be in. But it's
Wow.
absolutely gorgeous at the same time. And I think that this whole idea of how we've, or this whole, the reality of how we've just, things don't go back. Like we have Superfund site, but it's, if you read about what the remediation for Superfund sites are, it's not like it's turned back to the way it was. That's not what happens. And I just sort of feel like everything going forward is just learning how to live with it trying to find the best possible way to live with it, which is, I guess it's sort of tragic but sort of real.
Sure. We have to actually like it's not abstract anymore, I think.
Oh no.
We have to actually sit here and like actually it's not some philosophical thing. It's like really how are we going to do this, and actually think about it for real.
I think that's it's kind of cool. One of the things about being on the creek, which will happen when the audiences get into the boats, or even if they stand by the side, is what you were saying. There'll be the sounds of the creek as well as the music and the singers, and there'll also be the smells of the creek and the visual, and then this incredible visual beauty that has both the beauty of the things that are growing there and the animals that are there, but also the beauty of the city, that you can see the sky, the skyline from various, and the bridges from various parts of the creek. And so it all, you cannot sit there and not be aware of both the long time degradation, but also just this incredible sort of existing ecosystem that includes us. And then it feels a little bit empowering because you can engage it, and maybe you can do some remediation or some repair or some kind of reconciliation. But it's just the first step is just sort of engaging it, and sort of looking at it, and in this opera kind of celebrating it.
Yeah. Since we're talking about the space, maybe I'll start by, Marie, you already spoke about this, about the actual space of the creek, but tell us a little more and tell us how the actual production is going to like happen logistically. This is an opera, right? Which we don't usually think of, obviously, as being on a creek. So like, how is an opera on a creek? What is that?
Well, I think part of I love just the idea of what it kind of, the images that come to your mind when you think like it's an opera in a Superfund site. Like, I just love, like, I don't know. I picture I'm trying to make it as fantastic as that sounds, and the sort of contrasts that immediately come to mind when you think of that. The main sort of logistics that we're really be concentrating on in the next couple months is that half the audience, or more than half the audience, will be on land, and half the audience will be in boats. And the actual performance will take place right in between, like either right on the edge of the land or on a raft right next to the edge in the water right next to the edge of the land. And I like that there are two performers who are going to play multiple roles, and there's a lot of things to figure out just in terms of like moving people on and off the barge that are performing, moving the boats that people arrive in around. And so that's been really fun, kind of thinking about how all of that, how we just sort of make it all happen, and what it all kind of means to the piece. It's been really fun, thinking it through and actually starting to solve those problems.
Great. So Kurt, in terms of like the kind of theatrics, which I think, Marie is already touching on a bit, like what are kind of the challenges and benefits of creating a work that is in such a dynamic space? Because I think we can all imagine, like, it's very exciting, right? Like Marie is out there right now. We can even hear some of the boat sounds, some of the bird sounds, and like there's so much, right? There's so much happening like already in the space. Like if you think of music as like a blank canvas, this is like almost like a canvas that you're adding to and building from and riffing with in a way. Mm-hmm. So tell me about like the challenges and the joys of this type of dealing with this kind of theatrical space, musically and narratively.
Sure. Let me break it down into sort of a technical and then maybe more of an aesthetic explanation. So technically, it's actually very straightforward because Dana's libretto is broken down into these very distinctive and clear scenes. The modularity of that is really helpful because it allows, unlike a traditional opera, which has, of course, scenes, but a traditional opera is in a space that has been physically made so that it is on a stage which is stationary. I mean, stuff moves on the stage, but the stage itself does not move, and you in the audience do not move. It is moving for you. What is happening on stage, the musicians are stationary. The space itself is made for the sound that has been created for that piece. It is all curated and has been refined and developed over centuries for that particular genre of music. So this means when you're outside, especially on this site, it's just not appropriate to sort of think of the piece in that way. So the starting point of trying to conceptualize how it can be done was really made a lot more doable because Dana's libretto is so clear in this way. So this allowed us to break each scene apart so that it would take place at a different site along the creek. This allows for actual mobility for the performers, mobility for the audience members, and actual mobility for the music itself. So the music itself, so when I say the performers, the singers and the instrumentalists, it's not, I mean, it's more than they are actually traveling as the piece progresses from scene to scene. But the actual sound is also traveling because they're moving as the music is being made. And there's a fair amount of fixed media. And the way that the speakers are set up, the fixed media sound is moving with the audience as they go from scene to scene. So there's almost like it's almost like you're being led by the sound that's being generated and made along throughout the piece. So that does a lot of, that's structurally, and this is still very technical, but structurally that affords me the possibility of playing with the way, sort of that interstitial space between each scene, playing with it and creating, sort of basically transitions, giving a certain type of flexibility, trying to gauge the rate at which, if I have a certain type of music that is a certain rate and a certain affect, it can affect the way that people move from that spot to the next spot. Then there's the actual music itself, and this is a really strange project because some of the music is almost like musical theater, which I've never done, but it's, I guess, a recessive gene, and it's coming out, so, what the heck. So I have some musical theater music that it's very odd to hear musical theater type of sounding music, which is, and when I say musical theater, I'm being very general and reductionist. It's, coming from me, it's not really like, carousel, shall we say. But I think that, having that type of music, with that type of style, all of a sudden you hear the cement factory across the creek and it just sort of goes off, or a plane goes overhead. I don't think of it as something in opposition or in the way. I've been thinking about all those sounds the entire time, and I sort of like it when there's this, sort of very almost twee, hippity-hoppity sound music, and all of a sudden you hear a siren go by. There's just something really cool about the fact that it's not just a reminder, it's just making it very clear that this type of music, even that type of music, doesn't really belong here, but here you are, and it's happening. And then some of the music is quite abstract and more, I think, more in the type of style that I typically write in, where it's a little bit more wild and free and sonically adventurous and unusual. This piece has a lot of sound design built into it. So because of the fixed media portion, part of it, I've had to really be comfortable with embracing certain sounds and just letting them sit in the space, almost, without having to worry about conventional compositional stuff, sort of training that I've been told, well, this is how you write a song, for instance. This is, the middle of the song should go like this. None of that really applies, because I have to just remind myself, I'm outside, they're singing outside, they need to have this amount of space, sonic space for everything to happen, not just the music that I'm writing, but even for the sounds around them to happen.
I love that way of thinking about composition. I'm sure, like, we've lost Marie. Hopefully she can come back. So, I mean, I would imagine that this must affect the other music that you're gonna write after this too. Like, because I always use this example. Like, a few weeks ago I went to see the opera Omar in the theater district in Boston, and like it's like this space like you mentioned. It's an opera space, very traditional, but you can still hear the street sounds. You can still hear sirens outside, and it's just like that's happening. That's part of the production. So that's kind of interesting. Dana, I would love to hear, like, this is an opera, right? So what is the plot, or maybe anti-plot, or how do you come up with a script? Like, how linear is it? How modular is it? Like, tell me what the plot is, and how you kind of come up with this.
It's kind of it is called an odyssey, and it is a kind of journey. There is a destination, and which is you have various characters interacting with the audience, kind of giving their point of view of what the creek's for and what it should be for, and it's pretty satirical, and a lot of it is. I was kind of inspired talking to Marie and to Kurt and doing some trips on the Newtown Creek with Marie of this idea of all the different layers of history that are there. And so there's a ghost that kind of talks about this late 19th century exploitation of the purpose of the creek. And there's a contemporary group of developers who do a pitch at some point. And there's some citizen scientists who seem benign, but then maybe they're not benign. And then there's a kind of creek presence that is sort of overreaching it all. So and it is kind of modular. So we kind of knew that some of these things might not be seen in the same order, but I did still want there to be a kind of narrative arc of some kind, a kind of feeling that you're getting from one place to another, because you are literally getting from one place to another when you get on the boat and off the boat. So that made sense. And for me, I don't have any experience with music. So a lot of it was just thinking about the sounds of words and what they sound like. Can you make them sound like, the kind of thing that they're talking about, or work against the thing that they're talking about? And there's a lot of litany and repetition in what the characters are saying or singing. And that was really fun. Probably it's my fault that there's a little bit of that musical theater in there, because that's really okay, good. Because it is kind of a lot of humor in it. It is that kind of satirical, which I had a lot of fun with that part of it. And I think that with the costumes and stuff, it's going to be a lot of fun, as well as critical of some of the ways that we've regarded the creek over these past centuries.
Yeah, I don't think you should. I mean, there's no shaming and no blaming for musical theater at all. I love a lot of that music a great deal. I just have never written any of that music. And no, it's amazing stuff. And also, I don't think it's true that you don't know anything about music, Dana, because I'm just going to refer to, I could mention some of the novels that you've written, which, music might play a central role.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So you need to take it back.
Well, I love music. Music is very important, but my experience in collaborating with someone else on a musical piece that's all very new. But I do think that it's been it's great because I think because this is such a kind of, as I was saying earlier, so many tensions, I just thought that whatever weirdness my perspective would bring would be part of this whole combination of such unlike things, that would be kind of the the spirit of the piece is that, well, we're not really supposed to be doing an opera on the creek, and we're not really supposed to be on this polluted creek where there's, you know, there's black, they actually call the surface of the creek black mayonnaise because there's a mix of just the oil spill and all these
So you
long.
really can't go, just to clarify, like it's that, like you really can't even, you can't go in there.
You can go on it, but you can't swim in it. You can't wade in it. You certainly
It will
can't.
hurt your body.
Yeah, the water's really not.
It's not good.
It's not good, and it smells that way sometimes. A lot of the time.
Yeah.
So, but and sometimes the little, you can see kind of pools of reflective oil in the surface, and which also can be weirdly pretty.
Sure.
They're gorgeous. Actually, I mean, some of them are. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say I remember last summer when we did the workshop and just the rehearsals up to the workshop, and there was a fair amount of oil in one of the coves, and it was I felt a little bit like Narcissus, you know, just looking over, and it was like there I was, you know, on the water because the oil slick was so intense and so much like a mirror, and it was very seductive. It's really beautiful and gross.
Yeah, and I think that when I was thinking about what to write about, it was so much about the experience of being on the creek. Like, how do you describe what this feels like? This combination of degradation and beauty, and also just the joy of doing something that feels transgressive. Because one of the things that's great about Marie's work is these are these public waterways that everything in the city connives to sort of keep you out, you know, and make you think that you're not allowed to go there, but you are. And maybe there's some places you're not allowed to, and Marie will go there anyway, but which is exciting too. I mean, there are these giant digester eggs, which I'm sure if you've been in Greenpoint, you've seen them, and they look insane. But you walk around them. And there's a nature walk that, you know, the Newtown Creek Alliance and the city have done, and it's kind of a amazing combination of these unlikely things. And so, how can you capture that in the song? Can you make a pretty song that talks about cormorants and also talks about PCBs? And maybe you can, you know.
Yeah, it's important to look into the oil. I think that's like part of what's so exciting about this is that it gives people the chance to do that. You know, it's one thing to like read about it or you know, hear it or read statistics, but if you go there and see it, and especially for you all, you know, like you're spending a lot of time there working on this project, and like there's no way that isn't having an impact on your perspective and helping you feel kind of more connected to nature, and as you are all mentioning, like kind of breaking down these artificial walls of what nature means in like our culture, you know, especially in, you know, the way that our whole civilization is going. Were there any goals, kind of like big picture goals in terms of like what did you want kind of people to get out of this, or what did you want this to be, and how have those goals shifted or changed in the development of the project?
I mean, I just wanted it to be fun to work on, which it has been, and I wanted us to feel good about it from beginning to end, which so far it also has been. And I didn't want it to be rushed. I didn't want to feel like, because we've done this over 3 years, which for me is a pretty long time for one thing. There was no aesthetic or even political message. I just wanted it to be something that the three of us felt good about and felt like it was meaningful and worth our time.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It was when we did you guys did 3 songs back in September. Is that right, Kurt?
Did we do 3? We did 1, 2.
2.
2.
And it was so what I had hoped that as I would really get the sense of collaboration, because I don't usually do that because I work by myself and when I write novels, and I didn't really I felt it, of course, when we were brainstorming and giving feedback and talking and getting great ideas passed around, but also to hear the singers, the performers singing the words I'd written and hearing the music that Kurt had written all together and seeing people engaged in it and a kind of willing to kind of put their feet in, literally put their feet in the mud to get involved in this thing that we all made. And then I realized it was actually the experience itself. And now I was an audience member, but I was participating. It was really like nothing I'd ever experienced before. And it was very exciting. And I felt everybody, the excitement of performance is like something very new to me. And even though I wasn't a performer, I felt part of this whole kind of organism of just engaging in this moment. Everybody was right where they were, and nobody was, you know, everybody was game for anything, and it felt like anything could happen. And that's an unusual artistic experience, either as an audience member or as a creator, you know. Mm-hmm.
Totally, I totally agree.
Kind of in general terms, are there any like approaches to this whole topic of nature and art making that you found ineffective or unsatisfying or problematic that you've either like experienced or that you've like tried yourself and found like, oh, this doesn't work very well, or something is, or it's not meaningful?
That is, I mean, the project itself, the artistic, creative part of it, I haven't found. I mean, the only frustrations I've had have been my own shortcomings, of which there are many, in trying to be able, like, it's like, oh, how do I make, you know, the right type of fixed media so that, you know, that works in this environment, and that people, when they sing with it, won't sound foolish singing
Sure.
with it. You know, I mean, it's just like really practical, basic questions, because, you know, it's not like I'm the first person to try to, you know,
Sure.
put some media together with voice. But doing it outside with this type of soundscape that's, you know, completely unpredictable and chaotic, depending on the day of the week, the time of the day, the season, you know, things that are so out of control. Really, I think that just the fact that I had to relinquish all of that and just let it be was really, 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 it was a huge relief. Marie, she'll be back. She said she would be back, but you know, she's got a lot to say about just sort of the politics and also the interactions that happen along the creek, because there are so many parties involved on the creek, and it's a really fascinating dynamic with businesses, with people in the community, with the city, with the state, with the federal government, with indigenous people. I mean, it's complicated with on that type of land and water space. You know, the one thing that I have to say that was really is a frustration, and I've not talked to Dana about this at all, is that when you're doing a project like this, first of all, producing an opera, self-producing an opera is such a huge, it's just so much time and energy, but also trying to get funding is one thing. Funding is in and of itself a whole ball of wax that I think we learned a great deal about. I certainly did. But also just trying to get people to understand what you're trying to do. So this was positive because it made us have to really be very clear about the nature of the project and what we wanted to do artistically, creatively. But trying to get the funding, just putting out so many proposals to get feedback, and also realize that there's sort of interest for this type of thing, but there's also real caution. And for the funders that we were able to secure, for whom we were really grateful, it seems like they were really willing to go out on a limb with us. So that's been great.
It's so different. I feel I wonder if it has to do with just the fact that like it doesn't fit neatly into a box that people recognize. What is this? And if they have to think too hard about it, then they don't want to deal with it. But that's exactly what makes it so interesting.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, I think that the fact that the genre that this most often would be put into would be interdisciplinary, which is perfectly wonderful and fine, except that when you start talking about any individual part, it could easily fall into writing, it could easily fall into visual art, it could easily fall into opera or just music. And so I guess it's interdisciplinary, except that it's not traditionally interdisciplinary in so many ways, because then you've got the entire environmental and space aspect of it, which for some of the grants, there were actual categories for that as well. So it was really, and if you're only allowed to choose one, that's very complicated.
Makes it complicated.
Yeah.
What about you, Dana? Yeah, same question.
I think I agree with everything that Kurt is saying. I mean, I think Kurt and Marie really did all the hard parts of, the fundraising, and they're continuing to do all the hard parts of actually making this happen. What's hard is just doing something you haven't done before, and that feels like a risk, which is exciting, but also, you don't want to do a bad job and step on other people, people that, oh, I know how to do this, and it's not like that. You're supposed to do it this way. And so there's a lot of fear as an artist when you do something like that. And also in a collaboration, you don't want to, you want your part to be up to the parts of the other collaborators. And then also, I think just being in the land and feeling like you don't want to contribute to the degradation of the creek. You want to be part of, and there are organizations that really take care of the Newtown Creek. And so I think what's been great is how Marie and Kurt have collaborated with those organizations, and they're really excited for it. And I think that idea of having all these community organizations participate in the performance and in the happening and making it happen, that is very exciting, that kind of, and that was really important, not to be just sort of like, interlopers making their art and, not being part of sort of this more community focused aspect of it. But I think it's just a very, it is very exciting, and I still don't even know what it's going to be like until it happens, which is still really, and every time I try to describe it to people, they all get very excited, and you're just sort of like, yeah, it is exciting. We'll see what happens when it happens.
I hope it works out.
Yeah. Right.
No, I know it will be great because I've seen, what they're doing, but it's also just, there's so much it's not really improvisation, but there's so many X factors, right?
Oh, I think it's right. I mean, there's so many unknowns, and those variables, they change from day to day. So it's not like a typical set of unknowns, like a set of unknowns. Like if you're inside a concert hall for a performance, there are lots of unknowns, but they're sort of beholden to that space. And it's just so, it's very confusing and a little bit overwhelming that the unknowns themselves they change. But I think that's sort of what's really cool about it, or about at least my part of conceptualizing how the music is working and the sound is working, because I have been actually only until very recently I haven't written a large portion of it, and I'm almost done with it. But it wasn't until about a month ago when Marie and I finally came up with what seems like the final scene flow for the actual piece.
Like a storyboard kind of, or?
It's actually just sort of being on the site and like, okay, this is where site one, this is where scene one's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, how we're going to move between these different sites. This is the final version. And I really could not finish the piece until I knew what the final version, because the form of the piece is the form of the site. It's not like a template where you sit there and you write a sonata. It doesn't work. So until I knew what the actual physical form was going to be for people to move, that's when I could actually create the form of the piece. And so now, I mean, once it came into place, I was just like, lights went off. I was like, oh, this is how the piece works. This is how it goes from beginning to end. And so now that I have that shape, all those X factors, those unknown factors, they don't bother me as much because, I mean, something can happen, but the momentum of the piece is still going to be going forward. And that's fine. We want sort of strange stuff to happen.
One question I want to ask.
Is Marie
I want to ask.
I think her phone died.
Okay.
Marie, we lost. Yeah, that's too bad. Her phone, yeah. Okay, well, to give her my best and, tell her thanks and everything. Hope she's doing okay.
She's fine.
She didn't fall into the creek, right?
If you fall into the creek, then it's a problem. She has to go to the hospital.
No, of all the people, Marie is gonna be fine.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe she has immunity now from spending so
I think
much
she
time
does.
on the creek. Her body has built a tolerance or something.
Oh my Lord.
So, I love this kind of project. That's exactly why I want to interview you all. I have my train ticket. I'm coming down to see it, in September. So I'm really excited to be there. And I think, honestly, in my opinion, like we need more of this kind of stuff. Like I think this kind of art making that is, teaches us as artists, but it's a totally different experience for the audience and helps, when someone comes into a space like this just to experience a piece, it forces them to think about their surroundings differently, right? I would say. I think there are some people who might, hear about this and say something like, what is the point of making that floating opera when it feels like the world is falling apart? Like why do this? Why does this matter? So I'm wondering what would be your response to someone who asks, like, why bother with this? What's the point of all this? Why does it matter? Why is it important?
I think you should begin, Dana.
Oh, really? I mean, it comes up a lot. I teach an MFA program, so we often say, well, what's the point of writing fiction when the world is falling apart? And those are good questions that I don't have the answers to. Except I do think that anything that kind of engages you in a way where that sort of can make you see the familiar world in an unfamiliar way, that can kind of make you see with your own eyes, see things in a different way, and make those connections, I think does encourage us to think about how we impact the world and what our role in the world should be or is. So I feel that it's kind of about helping each of us become more engaged and see more of the world that is all around us already, because so much of what we do is, disengaged from the world. And I do think that art can be a way of kind of clearing out space for getting new ideas about how to proceed. And I think that is very much, you can't have activism without artists. I don't think you can. I think you need to have be able to think of the world in a new way. And that's, I think, what good art should do for you.
That's wonderful. That's really beautiful. I listen to podcasts when I go running, and there's this one called The Gray Area through Vox with Sean Elling, and he had Elizabeth Cripps on, and they were sort of talking about this very topic. And my big takeaway was a beautiful episode, but my big takeaway from that particular episode and that conversation was that it's when you sort of lose hope entirely, like if you're sort of operating in this space of complete hopelessness, that's a really, really, really bad state for humanity to be working from. And I do see it, and I'm not really sure if it's necessarily hopelessness or despair. Well, despair is not hopelessness necessarily, but there is something really interesting I do observe with a lot of people, some of whom are really good friends, and many of whom I almost completely agree with, about just sort of the frightening reality of how everything is going in a direction. It's a train we cannot stop, nor can we get off of. We're just on this train. And so does that mean you just throw your hands up? And I just sort of feel like it's a little too easy to throw your hands up. And so maybe I'm not out at a demonstration throwing my body in front of something. I know I'm not doing that. I know that's not going to happen. But, this can be part of something that maybe it gets enough people thinking or aware. And as Dana mentioned, the community organizations we're working with, especially Newtown Creek Alliance, they're such a remarkable organization that is so deeply rooted in the community along the creek. Um, Anything we can do to help those organizations do more and have a greater reach, if this project can help them have a greater reach, if the North Brooklyn Community Boathouse, who we're working with, can have a greater reach because of this project, then that's a great thing. I mean, then we've done something that sort of is more hopeful.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So speaking of kind of explaining what this project is to people, the website that you have for Newtown Creek or the Newtown Odyssey is really, I think, really beautiful and effective at doing that. So, for anyone who maybe isn't in the area or is interested in learning about this project, there's some really great visuals and kind of demos, and there are these. I notice you have these kind of public rehearsals that I wish we had more time to kind of discuss, because I'm sure that must have been very interesting. But maybe if you could tell us more about, like, if people want to come and experience this in Newtown Creek or virtually in some manner, where's a good place for them to go?
Oh, sure. So we're having 3 performances. The first performance is actually an indoor, sort of like a dress rehearsal performance, and that's going to be at the Amont Gallery in Brooklyn, and that is on September 8th. All of this will be on our website, which is newtownodyssey.com. And September 9th and 10th is the premiere of the opera On the Creek at the Plank Road Public Access Space on the Maspeth side of Newtown Creek. And we're going to sell tickets from our website. Tickets go on sale August 1st. Each evening, the 9th and 10th. But because the space, we don't want to impact the space with too many people and cause any type of damage to the environment, we're limiting the number of tickets to 100 per evening. However, there are going to be tickets sold for people to go into canoes and experience the piece on the water. Those tickets, there will be a link on our website for you to purchase those tickets through the North Brooklyn Community Boathouse, because they're operating the boats, and so they're going to be taking care of the vending for those tickets. So that'll give a number of other tickets and other opportunities to experience the piece. I think that's everything for the actual performance. Access.
I was going to say, you guys are also documenting a lot of it, so there will be film of this stuff too, right?
There will be. Yes.
Good. That's very important.
It is important, because 3 years and 2 evenings and no documentation would be very sad.
Well, thank you both, and thank you to Marie, who is out on the creek. It's been really, really fun and interesting talking to you both, and I can't wait to come and experience this piece.
Thank
you,
you,
Ryan.